I wasn't looking for giants. I wasn't looking for a lost civilization, an erased history, or a grand conspiracy hidden in the architecture of our past. I was simply researching the logistical supply chains of 19th century commercial carpentry, specifically the manufacturing of hinges and brass fittings for public buildings between 1850 and 1890. It is a mundane topic, I know, but sometimes it is in the most mundane ledgers and the quietest archives that the greatest anomalies hide. I was looking through a digital collection of archival photographs, examining the entryways of standard post offices, city halls, and railway stations from the 1870s. And then I saw it. Look at this photograph. Let your eyes slowly pan up from the muddy cobblestone street, past the top hats of the men standing on the steps, and trace the vertical lines of the heavy oak doors rising behind them. Notice the scale. These men, averaging perhaps 5'6" in height during that era, are entirely dwarfed by an entryway that reaches 12, sometimes 15 feet into the air. At first, your mind rationalizes it. You think it is just a grand building, but look closer. Zoom in on the handles. Zoom in on the sheer mass of the solid wood and cast bronze. These are not lightweight decorative facades. These are functional, heavy, swinging barriers meant to be opened and closed daily by the general public. A solid oak door of these dimensions, complete with thick iron and bronze bracing, weighs upwards of 1,000 pounds per leaf. Why would a society that relies on manual labor, living in an era of horse-drawn carts and rudimentary steam engines, design a daily utility that requires the strength of a team of draft horses just to enter a building to mail a letter or pay a tax? The official narrative tells us that this was merely an architectural choice. The explanation provided by modern historians is simple, neat, and contained. We are told that these massive doors were designed for grandeur, to inspire awe in the populace, or perhaps to allow for better ventilation in the days before air conditioning. Sometimes they will even claim these towering entryways were built so that a man on horseback could ride directly into the foyer. But when you apply surgical precision to this logic, the official explanation collapses. Think about the winters in Chicago, in New York, in St. Petersburg, or in Paris. Why would architects in freezing climates design a 12-foot unsealed wooden barrier that would let out every ounce of generated heat the moment a citizen opened it to enter? It is a mathematical contradiction. Furthermore, if it is designed for a man on horseback, why are there steep, polished marble steps leading up to the threshold? Horses do not climb grand staircases to enter a post office. The scale of our world is dictated by our biology. A staircase is designed around the stride of a human leg. A handle is designed around the grip of a human hand. A doorway is designed to comfortably pass the height of a human frame. When a civilization builds for itself, it builds to its own measure. So why do these specific buildings, supposedly erected during the Industrial Revolution, completely ignore the biological reality of the humans who supposedly built them? Look at the wear and tear on the wood in these old photographs. Look at where the original brass push plates are located. In many of these unrenovated buildings, you will find the original ornate handles positioned 4 or 5 feet off the ground, an uncomfortable, unnatural height for a standard human to get the leverage needed to push a 1,000-pound door. And in countless photographs, you can see a strange secondary modification: smaller, human-sized doors, literally cut into the bottom half of the original giant doors. Why would a society build a door so massive, so heavy, and so functionally inappropriate for its population, only to immediately carve a smaller, normal-sized door into it just so people could actually get inside? It implies a succession. It implies that the people in the 1880s photographs did not construct these entryways. They merely found them, occupied them, and adapted them to fit their smaller stature. We are told a story of continuous, gradual evolution. But what the architecture shows us is a narrative of sudden inheritance. We are living in the ruins of something much grander, utilizing structures we would have no logical reason to build. If you are finding this investigation valuable, please subscribe to keep this research alive. And tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? Have you noticed these anomalies in your own streets? Let us look closely at the mechanics of a door. A standard interior residential door today weighs roughly 30 to 50 pounds. A solid oak door from the late 19th century, standing 12 to 15 feet tall, 3 to 4 inches thick, and adorned with cast bronze panels and iron bracing, easily exceeds 1,000, perhaps 2,000 pounds per leaf. If we accept the official narrative, we must accept the engineering and logistical impossibilities that come with it. The math simply does not add up. We are told these structures were erected by men using nothing but hand saws, chisels, steam-powered pulleys, and horse-drawn wagons. Let us apply the logic of a structural engineer to this claim. When you hang a 2,000-pound moving object on a vertical plane, you are creating an immense cantilevered load. The stress placed on the hinges is astronomical. To prevent a door of that mass from sagging, dragging on the floor, or ripping itself out of the stone frame, you need a level of metallurgical precision and structural anchoring that pushes the absolute limits of even modern fabrication. Look at the photographs of these hinges. Zoom in on the brass and iron joinery. These are not crude, blacksmith-forged brackets. They are surgically precise, frictionless joints that have allowed these massive barriers to swing silently for over a century without failing. How do you forge, forge, mill, and calibrate a friction-bearing hinge capable of supporting a ton of moving weight without computer numerical control machines or high-tensile modern steel alloys? And what about the frames? A door is only as strong as the frame holding it. The lateral pull on the stone entryways requires the limestone or granite blocks to be perfectly plumb and anchored deep into the foundation. If there is even a millimeter of settling in the building, a 12-foot door will jam permanently. Yet, we are told these massive civic buildings, insane asylums, and World's Fair pavilions were thrown together in a matter of 2 or 3 years. Look at the mud on the streets in these photos. Look at the wooden carts. Are we supposed to believe that temporary immigrant laborers in the 1870s calculated the shear and tensile loads of 2,000-pound doors swinging on unyielding marble thresholds, achieving tolerances of a fraction of an inch, using only plumb bobs and twine? The sheer logistical nightmare of the supply chain is a glaring anomaly. Where were the trees harvested to yield single, unblemished planks of oak or mahogany long enough for a 15-foot door? How were they transported from the deep forests to the mills and then across unpaved terrain to the building sites without modern hydraulic flatbeds? The transportation alone would require specialized wagons that do not exist in any of the photographic records. The labor force required for hauling, curing, milling, and assembling just the doors for one of these grand post offices would consume the entire budget and time of a small city. Now, apply this mathematical contradiction to the funding. Who paid for all of this? Why would a city council, operating in a post-Civil War or rapidly expanding pioneer economy, approve the astronomical expense of mining, casting, transporting, and installing doors sized for giants just for a local bureaucratic office? It defies the fundamental laws of human economics. People build for efficiency. People build for their own scale. If you are constructing a building to process mail or house orphans, you do not build it so large that the heating costs bankrupt the state, nor do you install doors so heavy that a child or an elderly person cannot physically push them open. Unless, of course, the people claiming to have built them did not build them at all. Here is where the official narrative truly breaks down, and where the evidence forces us to look at an alternative reality. When you observe the small, weathered people in these 19th century photographs, standing awkwardly in front of architecture that towers over them in unsettling precision, you are not looking at the builders. You are looking at the inheritors. This brings us to the inheritance theory. The central premise we must consider is that we are living in the ruins of a prior, more advanced global civilization. We did not construct these monumental edifices. We found them. Like hermit crabs scuttling along the ocean floor, we have simply occupied the discarded shells of a much larger, grander creature. We moved into buildings that we would have absolutely no capacity to construct ourselves. Look again at the secondary doors, the human-sized cutouts surgically carved into the bottom of the massive wooden gates. This is the ultimate proof of inheritance. A builder constructing a door for their own use does not immediately mutilate their own masterpiece to make it functional. That is the act of a scavenger. It is the act of a smaller, biologically weaker population moving into the infrastructure of a society that was literally larger than life. Whether that prior society consisted of a population of actual biological giants who were systematically eliminated or hidden from the record, or whether they simply possessed a paradigm of construction that allowed them to build on a scale we cannot fathom, the physical evidence remains. Let us dig deeper into the material science required for the hardware. Consider the handles, the escutcheons, and the decorative copper and bronze push plates. In the late 1800s, casting bronze of this size and uniformity without impurities creating weak points was incredibly difficult. Yet, the metallurgical purity of the hardware found on these giant doors shows no pitting, no stress fractures, and no signs of the crude manufacturing we are told characterized the era. Furthermore, consider the acoustic properties of the entrance halls these doors protect. If you have ever stood in one of these massive foyers when a 12-foot door swings shut, you will notice something unsettling. It does not slam with a hollow, echoing crash. The frames are engineered to create a pneumatic seal, trapping a cushion of air that deadens the sound. The acoustics are perfectly tuned. This requires an understanding of fluid dynamics and spatial geometry that goes far beyond a man with a hammer and a chisel. How does a civilization recovering from wars, battling diseases, and relying on basic steam power achieve this? They don't. The men in the photographs looking bewildered in their oversized suits are posing with shovels in front of palaces they claim to have just built. But where are the blueprints detailing the load-bearing calculations for these specific hinges? Where are the supply receipts for the tons of raw brass needed? The historical record is entirely empty. We are expected to believe in the impossible, rather than question the obvious. The people occupying these structures in the 1800s were operating with technology that was mathematically and physically incapable of producing such works. The architecture was not merely aesthetic, it was functional for whoever originally occupied it. We are merely the surviving occupants of a downgraded reality, using inferior technology to patch up the remnants of a world that was physically superior to ours. If this anomaly were confined to a single post office in Chicago or one courthouse in Paris, we could perhaps dismiss it as the eccentric vision of a rogue architect attempting to leave a massive, albeit impractical, legacy. I tried to do just that. I wanted to close the ledger, attribute the anomaly to 19th century hubris, and move on to the next set of files. But once you pull this thread, the entire fabric of the official narrative begins to unravel. I started pulling archival photographs from other cities, other continents, looking for the limits of this architectural absurdity. I assumed I would find a boundary where these 12 and 15-foot doors stopped, where standard human logic reasserted itself and proportions returned to normal. I did not find that boundary. Look at this sepia photograph from Melbourne, Australia, dated 1880. Notice the colossal wooden double doors on the Parliament building. Now overlay it with this image of a civic building from Buenos Aires, Argentina, taken in 1885. Now compare both of them to this stereoscopic slide of a railway station in St. Petersburg, Russia from the 1870s. Let your eyes trace the geometry. It is not just that they are all extraordinarily large, it is that they are identical. The proportions of the oak panels, the height-to-width ratio, the specific placement of the heavy bronze escutcheons, the exact arc of the limestone keystones resting above the thresholds, they are carbon copies of one another. Imagine the logistical pipeline required under the official narrative. An architect in London drafts a blueprint for a 15-foot solid oak door with cast bronze friction hinges. He then must send this paper blueprint by steamship to Melbourne, to Buenos Aires, to Chicago. The local foremen, who have no telephone and no telegraph capable of transmitting complex geometric schematics, must then source the exact same ancient growth timber. They must find local foundries capable of pouring hundreds of pounds of molten bronze into perfect, airtight molds to create hinges that will not shear under a 2-ton cantilevered load. They must do this perfectly, on the first try, in cities that are allegedly barely a few decades old. And they must do it all while their workers are living in wooden shacks on muddy streets. The sheer absurdity of this premise is an insult to engineering. When you look at the geographical spread of these identical structures, the coordination problem becomes impossible to ignore. If we believe the history books, we must believe that separate teams of immigrant laborers, using different local resources, speaking different languages, all simultaneously decided to build unheatable, unopenable, 15-foot doors for 5-foot-tall citizens. Or we must consider the alternative. We must consider that these buildings were already there. They were part of a unified global civilization that possessed a standardized building code, a global grid designed for a society whose inhabitants, or whose technology, required a 12-foot clearance. Let your eyes linger on the human-sized doors cut into the giant panels across these different continents. In Edinburgh, Scotland, you see the exact same phenomenon we saw in New York. A massive, towering wooden door permanently bolted shut or fused to the stone frame with a crude, human-sized rectangular door sawed directly into the beautiful, ancient wood at the bottom. Notice the joinery. The original 15-foot door features seamless, interlocking joints, sealed against the weather with an almost airtight precision. But the small door, the one added for us, is held together with crude iron nails. The hinges are cheap, mass-produced iron that bleeds rust down the ancient wood. The edges are splintered. It is an act of architectural vandalism. If the same master craftsman built the giant door, why did they butcher it so poorly to add the smaller one? The answer is that they didn't. The master craftsmen were gone. The scavengers had arrived. The pattern repeats. Over and over again across every continent, we see the exact same act of scavenging. We see a smaller people hacking their way into the infrastructure of a larger world. Zoom out on these photos. Look at the environments surrounding these monumental thresholds. In almost every archival image from the mid-19th century featuring these giant doors, the streets are unpaved. They are rivers of thick, churning mud. You see horse-drawn carts struggling through deep ruts, men in ragged coats carrying wooden buckets, and rudimentary planks laid down just so pedestrians can cross the muck without ruining their boots. Yet, rising from this absolute squalor, without a speck of construction debris, without a single crane or hydraulic lift in sight, are these immaculate, impossibly grand edifices with their giant entryways. The visual dissonance is staggering. A civilization capable of milling, transporting, and hanging 2-ton doors with surgical precision does not forget how to pave a road. Notice where the bottom of the doors meet the street. In many of these global examples, The grand staircases seem truncated. Sometimes the massive doors are awkwardly close to the ground, missing the grand plinths you would expect for such towering structures. It is as if the street level itself has risen, swallowing the true foundation of the building. Did the builders in London, Cape Town, and Santiago all simultaneously miscalculate their foundation grades? Or did a global event, a cataclysm of mud and earth, sweep through these cities, burying the lower levels, leaving these giant doors as the new ground floor entryways for the survivors who wandered into the empty cities? The pattern repeats. The same towering doors, the same surgical precision, the same crude, human-sized cutouts, the same unpaved, muddy streets surrounding pristine, impossible architecture. I did not want to see a global conspiracy. I wanted to see 19th century carpenters practicing their trade. But the photographs do not lie. The official record asks us to believe in isolated, simultaneous miracles of irrational engineering. The physical evidence points to a single, global, erased empire. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. You will never walk past a historic bank, a grand old post office, or a classical museum the same way again. You will look at the giant brass handles hovering 5 feet above your head. You will look at the massive hinges supporting a weight we would struggle to lift today. You will look at the small, human-sized door hacked into the base, and you will know that the building was not built for you. If you manufacture a 2-ton moving object in the 19th century, you leave a massive paper trail. The production of a single 12-foot oak door with cast bronze friction hinges requires a sprawling, highly coordinated logistical network. It requires detailed timber deeds, extensive shipping manifests, foundry casting molds, and payroll ledgers for hundreds of specialized master-level craftsmen. Most importantly, it requires architectural blueprints calculating the exact cantilevered load and shear stress the stone frame must endure. So, as a reluctant investigator, I did what any forensic auditor would do. I went looking for the receipts. I searched the municipal archives of the cities boasting these towering entryways. I combed through the digital registries of historical societies, looking for the factory records that produced this uniform, impossibly heavy hardware across multiple continents. Do you know what I found? Nothing. The ledgers are empty. The blueprints, if they exist at all in the public record, are crude, post-dated sketches that show the aesthetic facade, but entirely omit the complex load-bearing calculations for the hinges and the foundations. When you ask the historical institutes and the academic curators to produce the primary source documentation for the engineering of these giant doors, the silence is deafening. Instead of documentation, we find destruction. We find a convenient, repetitive pattern of localized disasters wiping out the structural history of these specific buildings. Consider the sheer number of mysterious, catastrophic urban fires that occurred during a very specific window of time. Between 1850 and the early 20th century, nearly every major city featuring this impossible, oversized architecture suffered a massive inferno. We are told that a cow kicked over a lantern in Chicago in 1871, or that dry winds sparked the Great Fire of Peshtigo, leveling entire infrastructures. But look at the high-resolution photographs taken in the immediate aftermath of these blazes. The massive stone and masonry shells of the grand buildings still stand resolute against the sky. What burned were the interiors, the municipal records, and the original, massive woodwork, the giant doors. Could it be that these fires were not tragic accidents of poor urban planning, but rather coordinated clearing events? If you wanted to hollow out the anomalous infrastructure of a previous, more advanced civilization, a sweeping fire is the perfect, untraceable tool. It leaves the indestructible stone facades intact for the new, smaller occupants to claim, but it completely destroys the massive wooden doors and interior fittings that betray the true, unsettling scale of the original builders. What the fires did not consume, with the fires tune, the grand renovations finished. Look closely at the archival photographs from the 1920s and 1930s. Across the globe, we see work crews systematically altering these entryways. They are not merely repairing them, they are erasing their original impossible purpose. You can see the heavy 15-foot doors being pried off their massive iron hinges, hauled away on flatbeds, and replaced. But the new administrators could not simply hang a normal, lightweight door in a giant archway. Notice the brickwork in these restoration photos. In countless classical buildings, the top half of the majestic, soaring limestone arches has been unceremoniously bricked up. They filled the grand, resonant void with cheap mortar and modern cinder blocks, completely ruining the aesthetic symmetry, just so they could install a standard 6-foot 8-inch glass door at the bottom. Why would a society spend an astronomical fortune to construct a towering, mathematically perfect arch, only to spend more money a few decades later to brick it up and make it smaller? It is an act of architectural regression. It is the physical right-sizing of an inherited world. The most brazen act of erasure, however, occurred in plain sight. It happened at the Great World's Fairs: Chicago in 1893, Paris in 1900, St. Louis in 1904. We are told by the official narrative that millions of dollars and thousands of laborers were deployed to build sprawling, immaculate, classical cities out of temporary plaster and hemp, only to dynamite them into dust a few months later. But look at the photographs of the doors on the Palace of Fine Arts or the agricultural building before the demolition. Look at the depth of the shadow on the wood. Plaster does not hang on massive friction hinges. Temporary facades do not require 12-foot solid oak entryways with functional, heavy brass handles. If we hypothesize a reset window in the 19th century, these fairs make perfect, chilling sense. They were not temporary constructions. They were the last intact, functioning neighborhoods of the old, inherited world. The administrators of the new narrative opened them up to the surviving population, presented them as an impossible, fleeting spectacle to be marveled at, and then executed a controlled demolition. They blasted the giant doors, the towering archways, and the anomalous proportions into rubble, erasing the physical scale of the past forever. When you alter the physical environment, you alter the memory of the people who live in it. The institutions changed the family names, scattered the populations through orphan trains, and systematically ripped out the oversized architecture that would have caused the next generation to ask dangerous questions. The official record demands that we look at a 12-foot door and see only a decorative choice. It demands that we ignore our own biology, the limits of thermodynamics, and the basic laws of logistics. But the empty archives tell a different story. The bricked-up archways and the sawed-off hinges are scars on the buildings, proving that a massive global alteration took place. We are walking through a historical crime scene where the body has been moved, but the architectural chalk outline remains. The evidence was removed, the ledgers were burned, and the true scale of the builders was excised from the history books. When you finally grasp the logistical impossibility of these 12-foot doors, something shifts in your understanding of the world. A door is not merely a piece of wood and bronze. A door is a threshold. It dictates how you enter a space, how you feel when you cross from the outside to the inside, and what kind of environment awaits you. If a society builds a 15-foot entryway, it is because the interior space demands it. It implies soaring ceilings, massive arched windows, and a volume of air that is mathematically contradictory to everything we are told about 19th century heating and survival. Think about what it means to live in a world where a 12-foot, unsealed oak door is the standard. It means you are not worried about the winter draft. It means you are not rationing coal or struggling to pay a centralized utility company for the basic right to stay warm. The sheer volume of these inherited classical buildings, their massive copper domes, their soaring internal vaults, and their towering entryways suggests a civilization that possessed an absolute abundance of energy. They did not build tight, insulated, low-ceilinged boxes because they did not have to. They lived in an elegant symbiosis with atmospheric energy, utilizing the very architecture of their cities to draw, store, and distribute power freely. The giant doors were simply the grand valves of these living, breathing structures. Contrast that lost elegance with the reality we inhabit today. We live in an era of profound aesthetic and technological degradation. We spend our entire lives laboring to pay off 30-year mortgages on homes built from drywall, cheap pine, and toxic synthetic insulation. We sit in cramped offices under the hum of fluorescent lights, surrounded by drop ceilings and plastic fixtures engineered for planned obsolescence. Every month, we pay a portion of our labor to a grid that meters out our heat and light. We are told this is the pinnacle of human progress. We are told that we are at the apex of history, looking down upon the primitive, horse-drawn world of the 1800s. But when you stand on the muddy, unpaved street of a historical photograph and look up at a perfectly proportioned, 12-foot solid oak door resting on frictionless cast bronze hinges, the illusion shatters. You realize that we are not the apex. We are the downgraded survivors. There is a deep, overwhelming melancholy that comes with this realization. It is the grief of a robbed inheritance. We look at the magnificent limestone facades, the intricately carved marble steps, and the soaring archways in our downtown squares, and we feel a strange, haunting nostalgia for a utopia we never actually lived in. Our souls recognize the beauty, the permanence, and the health of that lost world, even if our history books deny its existence. We were meant to live in cities that resonated with acoustic harmony, surrounded by architecture that elevated the human spirit rather than crushing it into manageable, profitable little boxes. Instead, we are the orphans of a forgotten reset. We are the scuttling occupants of a stolen empire, paying rent to the very institutions that erased our past. They took the free energy, they burned the archives, they altered our family names, and they left us with the monumental shells of a civilization we are mathematically incapable of replicating. They bricked up the grand archways and sawed crude, splinting spacian chromatics, splintered holes into the bottoms of the magnificent wooden doors, forcing us to literally bow our heads and shrink ourselves just to enter the ruins of our own heritage. They wanted us to forget what human potential actually looks like. If you surround a population with brutalist concrete, cheap plastic, and cramped dimensions, they will eventually believe that they are small. But the old world is still bleeding through. The sheer physical mass of what was left behind is too large to completely hide. The towering doors are still there, standing as silent, wooden sentinels against the lies of the official narrative. This is the burden of the reluctant investigator. You can no longer walk blindly through your own city. You will approach the grand post office, the historic library, or the local museum, and you will stop at the threshold. You will look at the placement of the heavy brass handle, hovering unnaturally high above your reach. You will trace the outline of the crude, human-sized door hacked into the ancient, masterful joinery of the original gate. You will feel the weight of the lost world pressing down on you, and the profound sadness of the utopia that was stolen from your bloodline. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The historical record asks us to simply close our eyes. It demands that we look at a 12-foot solid oak door, suspended on frictionless bronze hinges, and accept it as a mere decorative flourish of a primitive horse-drawn era. But physics does not bend to the will of academic institutions. The logistical impossibilities, the mathematical contradictions of the cantilevered weight, and the surgical precision of the joinery all point to a single, unsettling truth. We are the inheritors of a world we did not build. We are the smaller, biologically downgraded occupants wandering through the massive, elegant corridors of an erased empire. When you walk down the street tomorrow, I want you to look closely at the oldest civic buildings in your town. Look past the modern plastic signage and the cheap asphalt. Look at the thresholds. Measure the height of the original stone archways against your own frame. Look for the scars in the masonry, where the grand, soaring entrances were unceremoniously bricked up to accommodate our diminished stature. Look for the human-sized rectangles sawed violently into the bottoms of ancient, beautiful wood. The official narrative will tell you this is just the march of progress, the simple evolution of architectural styles. But the silence in the archives tells a different story. If these massive structures were truly built by the ragged laborers in the 19th century photographs, why did they build them for giants? And more importantly, if the original architects possessed the breathtaking technology to manipulate stone, wood, and metal with such harmonious, impossible scale, where did they go? What kind of cataclysm, or what kind of coordinated institutional erasure, could wipe an entire global civilization from our collective memory, leaving us with nothing but their oversized doors? We may never find the original blueprints because they have likely been burned. But they could not burn the stone, and they could not hide the sheer mass of the doorways we walk through every single day. The evidence is all around us, waiting for you to see it. If this video resonated with you, please like and share it to help break the algorithm's silence. Subscribe for the next part of the investigation. The truth is waiting.